G'day friends, welcome back to the OFFbit. As I do, I've been scouring eBay again, and I've just found myself some more
cheap thrills.
So let's kick back and enjoy the ride. Looks like our gnome's back with another
cheap thrill.
This particular card is the Quadro FX3500. First thing you need to know about this card, don't underestimate the noise that fan can make. Holy balls, it's like a small jet airplane.
Flight FX3500, you're clear for takeoff. Roger.
And while we're talking about planes, this card is pretty plain. Probably the most impressive thing that this card has got is the Nvidia Quadro label on the fan. Quadro means business. It's more worried about getting the job done. So no frills here. Now under the plain Jane look is a 7900 GS. Now I'm sure a lot of my viewers are like, what the flip is that? Well, in 2006, this is what a top of the line card looked like. This plain Jane packed 256 meg of GDDR3. Memory was clocked at 660 MHz and the GPU clock at 450 MHz. It's based off the G71 and it's the Curry architecture. It runs DirectX 9.0C. It's got support for OpenGL 2.1. Doesn't even know what the hell Vulkan is. And if you try to run on Windows 10, you're in for a treat. This card owes me $5, so that's why I think this is going to be a
cheap thrill.
So hold on tight as we jump in the benchmarks. I'm pretty sure we're going to run into lots of problems. Right, today's test was done on my usual bench machine, which is the Intel i5-760 running 2.8 GHz. We've kitted out the motherboard with 8 GB RAM. The motherboard we're using today is the Gigabyte H55M-S2H. Got a handful of Western Digital green drives, and our power supply is Antec True Power Trio 550 watts. Okay, first benchmark test today will be Cinebench R15. Quadro FX3500 scored a big fat juicy error. Minitune Heaven gave us a similar problem, except for we just stare at the desktop. 3D Mark's Firestrike wouldn't even start, but I kind of got one of the synthetics, but it's not really a synthetic, but here it is. So Counter-Strike Source, we scored 34.04 frames per second in the video stress test. This is running at 1920 by 1080 at high detail. Didn't do too well, did it? So first up, as you can see, we're running Team Fortress 2. So our benchmark's Team Fortress 2. So it's running 1920 by 1080 with low details. So average frame rate was 38.4 frames per second. So it was fairly playable. But being a competitive game, it's not the sort of frame rate you want to be playing with. Our maximum frame rate, we did hit 218.2 frames per second. I'd say we're probably looking at a menu or something like that. Our minimum frame rate was at 11.8 frames per second. 0.1% lows is 1.6 frames per second. So it does have dips, but overall it was fairly playable and pretty amazing for the age of this card. Counter-Strike Source played pretty similar to Team Fortress 2. I mean, they practically are the same game, it's the same engine. So our average frame rate was 29.7 frames per second. We had a maximum of 89.4. Our 0.1% lows was 1.9 frames per second. So ran all right. Probably nothing you want to take into a competitive competition type game. So you'll get annoyed with some of the dips, but actually ran fine. For something that this old again, ran fine. $5 for a card that can run Counter-Strike Source. Yeah, it's not bad. Now this card is a DirectX 9 card. Now, we did struggle to find games that would actually run on this card. Now, there's a lot of DirectX 9 games out there, but for some reason, this version or whatever's set up in the drivers, or even the hardware itself, it just would not run all the games. However, the Half-Life Source engine had no problem. Now, this is probably because it's a pretty old game, or gaming engine, at least, anyway. Now, we're running this at 1920 by 1080. Now, this card probably better run this at a 720p resolution or even lower. So, if you want more frames, let's pull it back. Minecraft gave us this error that our video card is basically getting too old. Now, it is still supported in this version, but that message there basically says that this is the last version that you'll be able to run this video card on. So I've had the GT220 from our last Cheap Thrills video, had the same problem. Now, Minecraft is looking pretty bland today. That's because we pulled back all the details, all the shadows, and the draw distance being pulled back. So, pretty much running this at very low. Now, Minecraft was very much so playable once you turn the details back anyway. We're running at 1920 by 1080p. Our average frame rate sat around about 34.3 frames per second. Our max was 60 frames per second, and our 0.1% lows was 17.9 frames per second. So actually, pretty good. However, it's just Minecraft. Nothing too fancy. So wrapping this up, was this card a cheap thrill? I'm thinking more like
Cheap fail.
it was definitely cheap. It was an adventure to get to work with Windows 10. And about every hour or so, you get yourself a nice blue screen of death. Now, Windows 10 is not actually supported on this card. I actually forced Windows 7, Windows 8 drivers, so the blue screen of deaths was probably attributed to that. But anyhow, the card hung in there pretty good. I was still pretty impressed that it could still run stuff. It is a very old card. This thing was released in 2006. Probably its biggest problem was its lack of support for DirectX and OpenGL. There's not many games that this thing can run, which is unfortunate because the card is kind of capable of scraping in at minimum settings for a lot of games. So to give an idea of what games we did try to run and games I thought would be fine with the performance that the card was giving out. So games such as Heroes of the Storm. Now we got an error message that will just return us back to the desktop. Valorant also did pretty much a similar thing, gave us an error and sent us back to the desktop. And Borderlands 2 also did the same thing. So, Quadro FX3500, I would leave behind in 2020. Big thumbs down. For the effort and the outcome, it's just not worth it. And even as we're watching Minecraft, this is probably the last version that this card will run. So on that note, we're going to leave it there. Goodbye FX3500. Thank you for the short time I got to play with you today. That's all I got for you today for the OFFbit. Now if you like this video, please hit that like button. If you want to see more of this content, hit that subscribe button. It will encourage me to keep on making these videos. Now guys, don't be strangers. Leave a comment. Even if you just want to say hi. Anyway, thanks for watching guys. We'll catch you next time on the OFFbit.